Hi there, welcome to this presentation about antagonistic threats in cyberspace. My name is Janne Haldesten and I'm the co-founder of Sectime, a cybersecurity company from Sweden. I've been doing this for roughly over 20 years and I specialize in cybersecurity but also information security in general. So to start off, everything around us is interconnected these days. We have a lot of different systems that are built, but also where systems connect with other systems. This means that there are possibilities that breaches in one system will affect a multitude of systems and create cascading effects. Today we can see that there are many different types of landscapes where different kinds of ecosystems where systems contribute to building ecosystems such as smart homes. You have, for instance, smart metering for measuring electricity. We have different kinds of household appliances that are connected, such as fridges, our TV sets, and the list goes on. So, in a bigger picture, we also have connected industry. We have smart farms. We have smart cities, and all these create dependencies, and this also means that we have ended up in a situation where we are very vulnerable and where attacks towards systems can have cyber physical effects, meaning that a logical attack such as a hacking attempt or a breach can have a physical impact on production lines, hospitals and other things. Ransomware is a pretty good example of that. So when vulnerabilities happen, they usually are a result of mistakes, where, so to speak, secure systems are rendered in a vulnerable state due to a missing configuration, for instance. But also in regard to security being a temporal state, meaning that we may be secure now, but an hour from now we can be insecure due to a new vulnerability that renders our defenses useless, or diminished at least. So one would think, if you were about to attack systems, where would you find them? Well, Shodan, which is simplified as a search engine for vulnerabilities, faulty configurations and such. Today it contains roughly over billions of vulnerable systems, and everything from connected cruise ships to ATM systems to telecommunications infrastructure, and the list goes on, are being exposed on the internet. And also, when these types of systems have been found, there are automated tools and already publicly available exploits to use for many of these systems. So it doesn't really require that much effort from an attacker point of view, even though if you know things technically in depth, that makes attacks easier to perform. So in regards to attack surfaces, there are different layers, so to speak. The first one is hardware, where, for instance, debug interfaces are being left active in the hardware when the products are being sold. This also gives an attacker possibility to actually use these interfaces to, for instance, dump things and to attack the systems, or even to bypass encryption, for instance, by performing a so-called side channel analysis. The other layer is when updating these systems, firmware is being used, and firmware can often be downloaded directly from the manufacturer's website. This also means, apart from the legitimate users that are updating these their systems, also attackers are downloading these firmware images, reverse engineering them, hoping to find, for instance, credentials that could be used to attack the systems or the backend. We also have the communications to and from the devices. But also different types of endpoints, nodes, mobile phones that are being used to control, for instance, connected devices. And conversely, these systems are connected to often a cloud instance, and by actually attacking the cloud instance, attacker may gain hold of all connected devices and perform a so-called downscale attack. So today, vendors don't really profit from the base product anymore. They need to evolve their products, and they do it by actually implementing different kinds of functionality. They are connecting the devices to the internet. And by doing that, these devices become vulnerable to exploitation too. So this pretty much have resulted in there are a lot of unprotected Internet of Things devices, but also industrial control systems, so on, out there. So cyberspace have emerged as a new warfighting domain for many countries. This is more from a governmental point of view, but where the use of cyber can gain effects that previous types of warfare didn't. And this also has changed the perception about what modern warfare looks like. With cyber, an attacker can hit critical infrastructure where it used to where they actually had to attack the field forces by also affecting population in order to move to the critical point to actually bring a country to collapse. But through cyber, and also cyber being one tool in the hybrid warfare toolbox, things have shaped to be different these days. And this is a reality that affects us all. So one would think, in that context, what does cyber provide that other forms of warfare didn't? Well, firstly, you can buy different types of malware and other types of IT weapons quite cheap in comparison with regular weapon systems. But also it creates this attribution advantage when it's actually difficult to identify an attacker in comparison with kinetic warfare, for instance. And that also has rendered us in a situation where these means are being used, since it provides a lot of advantages for an attacker. And it essentially started off during 2010 and the cyber attacks towards the nuclear facility in Iran, in Natanz. That also became sort of the starting point for the cyber war arms race, where many countries have established cyber commands in order to gain advantage of this type of new weapons arsenals. So, in essence, the cyber domain has also allowed cybercrime to flourish, since it creates this anonymous environment when it's actually difficult to to identify the perpetrator. This also means that many places on the internet are being used as money laundering mechanisms for organized crime, for instance, but also where, for instance, capability for denial of service attacks can be rented by the hour quite cheaply in order to, for instance, bring down a call center to the very cost of $20. And the underground cybercrime community works like any other company per se. There are different roles. There are those who actually specialize in creating malware, those that specialize in connecting consumers for these type of services to the cybercrime as a service kits, like you get to use the entire infrastructure, for instance, during a certain amount of time for a certain cost. There are people that specialize in creating these fake websites that mimics the real ones in order to fool the victims. So this is sort of an unholy ecosystem. Largely, cybercrime costs a lot for the society. In average, a study conducted by the CSIS a couple of years ago states that roughly between 0.4 to 1.4% of the GDP is lost every year due to cybercrime activities. One could of course discuss what these figures are based on, if it's the actual cost of managing a cyber incident in terms of the costs associated with investigating it and taking action, or if it's something more vague like the anticipated loss due to theft of information that are being used by another party where it's calculated loss. So it's quite vague, but still it gives a pretty good picture, at least an idea about the significant impact that these types of activities bring with them. So what can we do then, since it's quite easy to portray cyberspace as a very dark place with all bad things going on. But yes, we can actually make things a lot harder for the attackers by actually having a well-conceived security, both in regard to architecture and design, but also to constantly work with cybersecurity in a methodological way where we patch our systems, we do it on a continuous basis. We have vulnerability management in place, and so on. So we need to work with things constantly. As soon as we let go, we will have vulnerabilities that are being exploited. Also need security monitoring. It's very easy for organizations that don't have log management or are logging their activities in the networks to say, okay, actually we don't have any attacks. Why? Yeah, we don't see any because you're not logging, right? So monitoring and doing it constantly is very important. There's a saying that prevention is of course desirable, but identifying attacks is crucial. On top of that, we also need to work with awareness and training, since we can have the most advanced security program in place, but if our co-workers, colleagues, and contracting parties and partners doesn't know why we have them in place, they will invent new ways in doing their business, which in worst case actually can bring about new security problems instead. So making everybody understand why we're doing it and making them part of the security program, creating security culture, is equal as important. It's actually one of the success factors in many cases. Given that no organization is secure, make a bit more fun of it, there's two types of organizations. Those that have been breached and those that do not yet know that they have been, meaning that security isn't 100% secure. That's the only certainty. But we will also need to prepare for being breached, and for that we actually need to have incident response in place. Meaning that we should train for different types of scenarios, not only have written plans, but we need to implement them equally, and we need to train in managing breaches. It's better to actually do it during exercises than experiencing it firsthand during an actual incident. Another thing, since we're surrounded by different types of parties providing different services and products, we need to make sure that to secure the supply chain too. And this is one of the major problems, as I see it, since we can have a pretty good idea about our own security, but how do we efficiently audit the security of our contracting parties? And above all, how can we make sure that their subcontractors are doing things securely? Well, the thing is, it's very difficult to say impossible. So, but we can do a lot when it comes to supply chain security too. So that needs to be addressed as well. So, given this overview of the major things that can be done and needs to be done, a couple of things that we can start off with is actually, if we are unfamiliar with working actively with security, is to make a security assessment to know what are our protective values, what kind of threats are we facing, but also what kinds of security controls do we have in place. But most of all, what are we lacking in regard to what we need to protect. By doing that, we can get a pretty good picture of what we need to do, and in general, when we see customers and go through security, we see some of the things that are important. One of them is to have proper identity and access management in place, to have a robust system, and that's, for instance, where MobilityGuard solutions is one part in this. And also we need to assess our vulnerabilities, and this can be done through our vulnerability management program, where we actually scan, for instance, different types of applications, but also regular penetration testing, for instance. But before we actually move into managing vulnerabilities, we need to harden our environment and our systems, and we need to segment networks in order to have some kind of boundaries in place. And in regard to, for instance, ransomware, this is very important. So, also in regard to have some kind of context and see what's going on. Logging, of course, as mentioned before, but also getting some kind, at least a starting point in being prepared to manage incidents. So, as of this, this was pretty much what I wanted to share with you guys. So, thank you so much for listening in.